So much happened at Wimbledon just a couple weeks ago. I mean, there were the big storylines, injuries, and upsets that caught all of us fans by surprise. And even with the videos I got out covering the current big three in tennis, there were still several stories and players I wanted to analyze but just couldn't get to. Which is why I made this video. It's not a Wimbledon recap, but rather a bunch of mini analysis on the players that we didn't get to talk about during the tournament, which I'm calling the lessons learned at Wimbledon. What did we learn from some of the biggest players this year at Wimbledon? How did they play in this tournament, and what do I think about them going forward for the remainder of the season? I'm going to start off with our favorite Americans. Guys, 82 consecutive Grand Slams have gone by since an American man last won a major title. The last man to do it, Andy Roddick at the 2003 US Open. But while I wasn't exactly expecting any American man to win Wimbledon, Taylor Fritz's fourth round win over Sasha, and Tommy Paul winning Queens and then being up a set and a break against Alcaraz in the quarterfinal kinda gave me a flicker of hope, at least for the moment. And it all got me wondering, what if the expectations were just too high? For Fritz, he's now 0-4 in Grand Slam quarterfinals and missed out on a big opportunity to reach his first Grand Slam semifinal. And apart from his forehand letting him down and contributing to the majority of his 55 unforced errors against Musetti, Fritz also paid the price for not having enough variation in his game, especially at the net. This was totally on display when we saw points like this. But looking at the tournament as a whole, I think we can take away many positives from Fritz's outing. His composure and calmness in the pressure moments, particularly against Sasha, was impressive as he bagged his fourth top 10 win of the year. Fritz was 0-9 against top 5 players in Grand Slams before his match against Sasha, but now with the monkey off his back, I expect Fritz to re-enter the top 10 pretty soon. Taking a look at Shelton, I'll admit I'm still sold on him despite his relative inexperience on other surface outside of the hard courts. Having won 3 5-setters before falling to Sinner in the fourth round, there aren't many doubts about Shelton's mentality on the biggest stages. He's only one of 10 American men to reach the fourth round or better in at least 3 majors before turning 22, and what's even more interesting to me is that Shelton tends to find his best tennis at slams, winning 71% of his matches compared to only 56% in other tournaments. Big Ben was made for the big stage, and it's one of the many reasons why I think he might win a slam in the future. Am I being delusional? Maybe, but I have reasons why. And oh, did you see that 153-mile-per-hour ace in his second round match against Lloyd Harris? That's the fastest serve ever recorded at Wimbledon. I'm sure the Shelton fans loved that one. For Tommy Paul, I'm also upbeat about him alongside Shelton. Paul was coming right off the back of the Queen's title entering Wimbledon. He was on a 9-match win streak on grass, and after he was up a set and a break against Alcaraz, it looked like he was going to pull off an incredible upset. But perhaps he might have been guilty of trying to do too much against Carlitos, and in reality, it's really hard to blame him. His coach Brad Steen has worked on developing Paul's attacking game, specifically with his transition to net, and his footwork just continues to get better and better. In fact, for many fans, Tommy Paul is currently the best American men's tennis player. Is that a debatable point? And then we have Frances Tiafoe, who actually came closest to beating Alcaraz. It was crazy because Tiafoe's season has been on a downward trajectory, and according to him, he was losing to clowns. He then suffered an MCL strain at Queens and had to retire, so I didn't have any hopes of him coming to Wimbledon. But Big Foe's performance fighting from 2 sets down against Matteo Arnaldi and then his display against Alcaraz was unbelievable. Tiafoe says that he hasn't been happy playing tennis lately, but going into the hard court swing, I expect him to start putting up more and more of a fight against opponents. For Seb Korda, he was kicked out in the first round by Perricard, and at this point, what do you guys think is missing from Korda's game? On the women's side, Emma Navarro's straight sets win over Coco Gauff in the round of 16 was super impressive. Although she fell to Jasmine Paolini in her first Grand Slam quarterfinal, it's safe to say that Emma is cut from a different cloth. Her brand of tennis is definitely a bit unorthodox. Her forehand is incredibly smooth, and she has the return game to take down anyone. For someone only in her second full year on the tour, Emma's mentality is rock solid, and she's not afraid to take risks. She was 9 of 9 on net approach points against Gauff as she bagged her second top 5 win of the season. At this point, there's no doubt to me that she has top 10 potential. With Emma breaking into the top 15, 5 American women were in the top 15 for the first time since 2004. But there was more to Wimbledon than the overperforming Americans. Some players preferred to tear through the draw rather quietly, and one of those guys was Alex de Minaur. The Demon took down Archer Fils in 4 sets to reach the Wimbledon quarterfinal for the first time in his career, boosting his tally to 8-1 on grass this season. De Minaur only dropped 1 set all week, and we were eager to see how his match against Djokovic would play out. But we wouldn't be so lucky because he injured something in his hip and had to retire. I still think we have more to see from the Demon, so I'll leave the book open on him for another time. Injuries were a major concern at Wimbledon this year. Aryna Sabalenka withdrew from the tournament on the first day due to a shoulder injury she'd been dealing with. Vika Azarenka then followed suit, also withdrawing from the tournament with the shoulder injury herself. And then there was Hubert Hurkacz getting injured against Archer Fils and Grigor Dimitrov getting injured in the 4th round against Medvedev. Grigor would later reveal that he suffered an abductor tear in his left leg, so we expect him to be out for a while. Alexander Zverev also had some discomfort against Fritz after he overextended his knee during a slip and fall in a 3rd round win over Cam Norrie. So about these injuries. Was it just a mere coincidence, or was it due to something else? I know it rained a lot during the tournament, and that the grass might have been a little bit slick, but we could also point to the hectic clay season and the transition to grass being difficult for many players. There might be another reason I'm missing, so please let me know in the comments. Okay, back to one of the biggest performers of the tournament. What is the best way to describe Lorenzo Mussetti's game? A one-handed backhand player without an elite serve and zip on the forehand? Or an extremely crafty and very talented player who's won a couple of big matches and shown that he's a very good grass court player? Musetti was in great control of his backhand slice the entire tournament, and he was very frugal giving away points. Only 8 unforced errors in 4 sets against Perricard in the 4th round. More often than not, we saw him come out on top in those cat and mouse points pretty much the entire tournament. If Musetti manages to add more weight behind his shots in addition to his craftiness, it's safe to say that he'll eventually break the glass ceiling and might even force his way into the top 10 in the coming seasons. I plan to do a deep dive on Daniil Medvedev soon because I feel like I've been sleeping on him. Actually, Medi hasn't won a title in more than a year now, and he's been losing to both Sinner and Alcaraz. His matchup against Alcaraz just doesn't really favor him. Stylistically speaking, Alcaraz has the perfect game to beat Medvedev most of the time. And I don't think that Daniil's US Open win over Alcaraz should negate this fact. However, I was totally blown away seeing Medi stick it out to snap a 5-match losing streak against Sinner in a 4-hour thriller. Personally, I don't think Sinner's physical struggles should take anything away from that performance because it was incredible to watch. One thing I have noticed about Medi's game though is that he's been able to find more confidence in his forehand. I don't have the numbers exactly for his forehand speed, but I think it's pretty obvious that there's been some extra zip on it. We've definitely seen a significant uptick in the aggression off that wing this year, but the serve still isn't at the level that it was in 2021. For what it's worth, Medvedev is the only player to have beaten Jannik Sinner, Novak Djokovic, and Carlos Alcaraz at Grand Slams, and his semifinal appearance at Wimbledon made it the 9th time he's reached the semis of a Grand Slam. Nobody born in the 1990s has been able to do that. For these reasons, you can never quite count out Medvedev when it comes to spoiling the party. If you're expecting a Sinner-Alcaraz match, trust Medvedev to spoil the party. If you're looking for a Djokovic-Carlos match, also trust Medvedev to throw a wrench in the plans. He's 9-26 against players ranked number 2, 3, 4, and 5, but has a 7-5 record against players ranked number 1. How can you explain that? Going into the hard court summer, Medvedev is surely going to be a top 3 contender for the US Open title. In fact, he's made the US Open final 3 times in 5 years. That's gotta count for something. Jannik Sinner became the youngest man to reach 3 consecutive Wimbledon quarterfinals since Rafa Nadal in 2008, but his loss to Daniil kinda reopened some questions about his durability. You see, 7 of Jannik Sinner's last 8 losses at Grand Slams have been in 5 sets. Against the Russian, Sinner complained about dizziness, and of course, that had some impact on the match. But the big question is this: do you think that Sinner's durability is going to be a problem for him long term? The Italian might be number 1 in the rankings, but Alcaraz is the favorite for every slam right now, in my opinion. Not to worry, I made separate videos on Sinner's and Alcaraz's respective Wimbledon runs and what they mean for us as fans, so be sure to check them out if you haven't seen them already. Speaking of Alcaraz, he became just the 6th male player in Open-era history to win the Channel Slam, and the youngest man to successfully defend the Wimbledon singles title since Boris Becker in 1986. And add it to the fact that he became the youngest player to win the Channel Slam at 21 years old, and the first non-Big Three member to win multiple majors in a season, literally since Andre Agassi in 1999. Alcaraz's achievements have led to more and more comparisons with the Big Three. Tennis fans just can't help themselves with the comparisons. Who's better at 21, Carlos or Rafa? Take a look at their achievements at the same age and let me know what you think. Without going into the X's and O's and also not taking anything away from Carlitos, I think we really shouldn't be making some comparisons. For instance, Rafa at Carlitos' age had to deal with prime Roger Federer, who absolutely dominated everyone for the better part of a decade. But also trying to avoid the loophole of recency bias, I think Carlos might be the most complete 21-year-old I've ever seen. The guy has every shot in the book, and he literally does everything. I already made a video about Djokovic where I talked about the Wimbledon final and why Alcaraz was able to defeat the GOAT in straight sets. So if you missed out on that one, be sure to check it out as well. Switching gears, let's talk about a few other top players. Ahead of the tournament, Zverev said that this year's Wimbledon was the most open that it had been in the last 20 years. I mean, he even backed himself for the title.
The first time that I really feel like I'm here to be a competitor to maybe win the title.
Well, that didn't quite happen. As a matter of fact, history ended up repeating itself for Zverev because for the 3rd time in Grand Slams this season, he lost a match in 5 sets after having a clear lead. In Australia, he lost to Medvedev from 2 sets up. At the French Open final, he lost to Alcaraz after leading 2 sets to 1. This time, he lost to Taylor Fritz after also being up 2 sets. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much from Sasha because he's never made it past the 4th round at Wimbledon in his entire career. But let's throw the analysis out the window for a moment because all the attention right now is on his left knee. Sasha says he has a bone edema and tear in the capsule of his knee, a potentially serious injury that could take some time to fully heal. So with that said, Zverev's summer hardcourt season success will certainly depend on his fitness. But there's another top player whose problems aren't necessarily physical. Andrei Rublev lost to world number 122 Francisco Comesaña in the 1st round at Wimbledon. To his credit, Comesaña was serving lights out as he racked up 21 aces. His backhand slice also troubled Rublev a lot. Getting your first ever win on tour against a top 10 player is one heck of a start. But how did Rublev respond? Hitting himself with a racket more than half a dozen times. With Rublev also just losing to Thiago Agustin Tirante as the top seed in Bastad, he's now at risk of falling outside the top 10. The Russians' woes continue, but are they more self-inflicted than caused by opponents? Is it time for some soul-searching? I feel like Alcaraz is fully deserving of every bit of praise he gets because of his proficiency on all surfaces. In the past, it was normal even for a top player to spend a few years acclimatizing to new surfaces like grass. In fact, some top players never even managed to be good on the surface at all. But Alcaraz is special. He's learned how to play on all surfaces at such a young age. Unfortunately, we can't say the same thing about many of the other top players that are a lot older than him. One player that looks like he has almost no interest in grass is Casper Ruud. He lost to Fabio Fognini in 4 sets in the 2nd round to give Fabio his first win against a top 10 player at Wimbledon since 2010. At least, he did create one of the highlights of the tournament with this stunning backhand passing shot against Bolt in the 1st round. Stefanos Tsitsipas, Holger Rune, and a couple other top guys didn't have great tournaments either, but someone who did have a great tournament is a certain guy who's almost as tall as John Isner. Giovanni Mpetshi Perricard became the 5th lucky loser in the Open era to reach the 4th round of Wimbledon in the men's singles draw. I think we all know what the Frenchman's game is about. An enormous serve that looks like it's his birthright. After taking down Seb Korda in the 1st round, Perricard took care of business against Nishioka in the 2nd round before getting past Ruusuvuori in the 3rd. However, the crafty Lorenzo Musetti found a way to get past the Frenchman's enormous talent in the 4th round. How did Perricard earn his first main draw win? The answer is 51 aces. Perricard became just the 7th man in history to hit more than 50 aces in a match. In his first 3 matches alone, Perricard hit over 100 aces. At 6 feet 8 inches tall, the 20-year-old Frenchman is the tallest man inside the top 100, and he'll be looking to dominate with his serve on grass and the hard courts. The Olympics could be Andy Murray's final tournament. We now know that he'll also play doubles with Dan Evans in Paris. The three-time Grand Slam champ was honored on center court following his doubles match alongside his brother Jamie, and all the stars were present to watch it. Roger, Djokovic, John McEnroe, Martina Navratilova, Lleyton Hewitt, and Tim Henman, just to name a few. For some reason, the press decided to ask everyone what they thought about 5-set matches and whether or not they should be done away with at majors. Alexander Zverev says don't get rid of them.
The most difficult task in our sport is winning a Grand Slam because of the 5-set matches, and in my opinion there's no way that we should ever get rid of that.
Medvedev says he'd rather not play best of 5.
If you ask me, I would prefer 3 sets. That's just my personal opinion. 5 sets is much tougher for the body, so can get more injuries.
Alcaraz says he prefers 5-setters because they give him more chances to come back in a match. Novak Djokovic doesn't want it changed either, but is open to some adjustments like making the earlier rounds 3-setters. And then we have a couple of other takes here. We all know the toll best of 5 matches take on the body. That's probably why they're only reserved for the Grand Slams. In my opinion, it'll be weird if every single tournament becomes best of 3 sets. In a way, you could argue that it waters down some of the historical parts of the sport because it then becomes a lot easier for anyone to win a slam. 3-setters definitely increase the likelihood of upsets. But I understand that players are concerned about their health, and there are other intangibles to consider too. But I'm eager to hear your thoughts on if slams should be converted from best of 5 to best of 3. Switching focus to the women's tour, Lulu Sun crafted one of the stories of the year by becoming the first woman from New Zealand to reach the Wimbledon quarterfinal in the Open era. She then lost to Donna Vekic, who then became the first Croatian woman to reach the Wimbledon semifinals since Mirjana Lucic in 1999. But perhaps the biggest shocker, or maybe not depending on how you see it, was Iga Swiatek losing to Julia Putintseva. We all know that grass was Iga's worst surface, but for someone who was on a 21-match win streak, I thought she was going to make a deep run this time, and to be honest, I even had Iga as one of my favorites for the title. In the end, it was a horrible prediction. Putintseva mixed things up to disrupt Iga's rhythm and got a well-deserved win. But you could also argue that Iga self-destructed many times while trying to force the action and smother her opponent. The main culprit? Iga's forehand. Swiatek committed 46 errors, and the common theme was the forehand spraying those errors. As renowned tennis coach Craig O'Shaughnessy puts it, the forehand problems for Swiatek are multifaceted. Her extreme Western grip is great for adding spin to the ball, but it's not great for blocking your way out of trouble, which is a pretty essential skill on grass. Swiatek doesn't seem to possess a true blocking forehand at all. It seems like she only has one gear on that side and can't really modify or adapt the swing to the toughness of the shot. There is so much wrist and whip in her forehand, which is great for attacking tennis, but might make her struggle a bit on the defense. Iga had a different outlook though after her loss. She says it came down to this reason.
I know what I did wrong after Roland Garros. I didn't really rest properly. I'm not going to make this mistake again.
What are your thoughts about Iga's problems on grass? Do you think it came down to fatigue, or is there an intrinsic problem with her game that's preventing her from being dominant on grass? In the final, we saw Jasmine Paolini's life-changing year reach new heights as she became the first Italian woman to reach the final of 2 different Grand Slams. Before last month, Paolini hadn't even won a match at Wimbledon, and her opponent, Krejcikova, was having a terrible year herself before Wimby. So she would have fancied her chances in the final, but it wasn't meant to be. Here's a look at each player's path to the final. For me, it was Krejcikova's forehand that was the star of the show. Her stroke technique and efficiency was a joy to watch. It wasn't necessarily the racket head speed. It had more to do with the sharp angles she was creating and Paolini herself not really having enough length to work with. So Krejcikova ended up dictating many of the points off her forehand. Take a look at one of them. To her credit, Paolini tried to change the dynamics in the second set by playing more to Krejcikova's backhand, and it did change the game a lot, but she ultimately fell just short. And the unpredictability at Wimbledon continued. Barbara Krejcikova became the 8th different ladies singles champion over the past 8 editions of the tournament. Now, that's the longest streak of unique champions at Wimbledon in the Open era for men or women. No doubt Krejcikova's title win will quiet any doubts about her Grand Slam title haul because 2 slams isn't a fluke. And with a return to the top 10, this is definitely a turning point in her season. Speaking of rankings, Paolini became only the 3rd Italian woman in history to reach the top 5. Elsewhere, Emma Raducanu re-entered the top 100 after an impressive 4th round showing. If you enjoyed this video, you'll most likely enjoy some of the deep dives we did on the channel last week, going deeper into these 3 guys' games at Wimbledon. Also, I'm hard at work on merch designs for all of you, and I can't wait to share them here on the channel. The Medvedev deep dive is also coming soon, so if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and turn on post notifications. That way you know right when the video comes out. Until next time, keep swinging.